Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. We welcome you to today's broadcast, Drug and Alcohol Violations and Certifications. Just a little bit about Spark TS. Spark TS is a third-party administrator. We have a full-service lab and MRO. We do random pool management and consortiums. We also work with policy development and compliance. We are a full-service TPA with 24/7 drug and alcohol testing, and we have a software solution, RailTasker. RailTasker does handle and store and track drug and alcohol testing records for compliance. Spark TS was founded by Katie Enue, a lot of Katie, and I, Holly Rainwater, am the Vice President of Drug and Alcohol Testing. But that's enough about me. I have a very special speaker today, and I'm so glad all of you took the time out of your busy schedules to listen to Mitch's expertise. Mitch Harris is the Vice President of Safety and Compliance with the Rio Grande Pacific Corporation. He's a third-generation railroader. Mitch began his career with the Missouri Pacific Railroad in 1978. That makes you what, a teenager now, Mitch? Yeah. He began working in the short line industry in 1993, where he became intensely involved with in the area of training, safety, and compliance. Principally, he is responsible for the development and management of safety-related policies for the Rio Grande Pacific Corporation, and he's committed to providing safety leadership to his company and to the entire short line and regional railroad industry. He is instrumental in the development of the ASLRRA Safety and Training Committee, which he actually is the chairman of, and he was a proud recipient of the ASLRRA Safety Professional of the Year in 2008. Wow, Mitch, that's a pretty impressive bio.
It kind of makes you feel funny when you hear all of that. But anyway, thank you.
Yes. And I want to bring up one other thing in regards to the Rio Grande Pacific Corporation. Actually, on March 1st, Spark TS and the Rio Grande Pacific Corporation, we merged isn't the right word, but we joined a partnership. We have a partnership with the dispatching group 24/7. Any calls that come into Spark TS will be answered by the Rio Grande group, who is an expert in drug and alcohol, or an expert in the railroad industry. What they'll be able to do is triage our calls. We'll be able to dispatch collectors. Anything that's escalated will be able to be escalated to the right person. We are really excited for the opportunity to provide additional safety and operational excellence. It's been a great success for us to date. But with that said, we'll talk about today's presentation. Certifications can be a very difficult in the area to understand. We've got the 240, 242 certifications. Now you add another regulation like drug and alcohol testing. It just really can cause a lot of confusion. But I think it's really important to talk about what major event happened on January 4th, 1987. I did have a video I was going to show. It was the incident had just some video coverage on how tragic this event was. But this event really came forth and started drug and alcohol testing. Mitch, can you tell us what happened and a little bit of information about this event?
I can. There it is. Yeah, back in 1987, there was a crash up on the Northeast Corridor of Amtrak in the Baltimore area. That was pretty bad. It was a bad day for the railroad industry. Basically, what happened was a Conrail train, a consist of locomotives actually, were being hustled around, and they were coming out of one yard, going out to the main line to go to another yard. And the crew entered the main improperly on signal indications. They basically blew a red block and came out and were struck by the Amtrak train that was cruising along at pretty high speed. They had about 600 passengers on board. There were 174 injuries, 16 fatalities. including the Amtrak engineer. The Conrail engineer who was hustling the engines, and if you've been in the industry any time, you know this name, Ricky Gates. He was uninjured. He was at the controls of the locomotive at the time, and his brakeman, Ed Cromwell, suffered a broken leg from the accident. And it turns out that the crew, that they had both been smoking marijuana at the time of the incident. And a side note, there was a lot of rumor about this, and I've actually talked to FRA folks over the years who were involved in this accident who confirmed it, that not only were they smoking marijuana, they also had a television set rigged up in the locomotive so they could watch football at the time. They were distracted and loaded all at the same time, causing this horrible accident. Basically, what resulted was Ricky Gates, turns out he had a history of DWIs, and he was charged with manslaughter by locomotive for causing this crash, and he served time in prison. He later got cleaned up and became a chemical dependency counselor. He saw the light. The brakeman, Ed Cromwell, he received immunity in exchange for his testimony. And I remember a lot of this just on the news. The media covered it extensively, and it was a long, drawn-out court proceedings and everything, and as most of these cases are. And it was the deadliest crash for Amtrak at that time, up to that date. And at the request of the victims and their families, Ricky Gates testified in favor of federal legislation that now requires random drug testing for transportation. And it also, that crash also result what we have now for certification of engineers and conductors as well. This crash is what triggered all that. The FRA quickly realized that we're not testing these people. The airline industry was testing, the trucking was testing, busing was testing, the military was testing, but the railroads weren't. This is where it all started. And we all know that we're being faced with a lot of regulations these days. They're coming at us left and right. And we do, a lot of us feel, rightfully so, that we're being overregulated in some ways. Not with this one, in my opinion. This one was needed. I can tell you from my own personal experience working back in the 70s and 80s, it was bad out there until this started. It was bad. I always like to say that the head on the train, the locomotive engineer, was stoned and the conductor was passed out drunk in the caboose. And it was like that, and it was scary. And I was involved in that. And so this was needed, in my opinion. There was also a crash before that that compounded with this one down in Louisiana on the old ICG, the Illinois Central. And basically what happened was train crew got called. They were away from their home terminal. They got called early in the morning, came into the depot there, and they had been out drinking and actually were still drinking. And they conned the clerk into coming with them and running the locomotive. They'd show her how to do it. And they ended up dumping chemicals in the bayou that night, which was a very big mess and a lot of damage. There's another example why 219 was needed in this industry. So there you go. Yeah, they were quite drunk at the time.
Yeah, it looks like a
yeah, and the engineer, he had a history of violations as well. Just another example of just how big the problem really was back then, before it got cleaned up.
Thanks, Mitch, for that history. I always think the history of the why is very important on why we do what we do. We don't just make up these regulations. There's always that reason why. And then some more information in regards to definitions. We're really specifically talking about FRA, and FRA has a term, now it's called regulated employee. Previously, back before 17, it was the term covered service employee. But since 2017, other employee types have been brought into FRA testing. A regulated employee is a covered employee, maintenance of way employee, and a mechanical employee. When we look at a covered employee, that's an hour of service employee, meaning like conductors, engineers, signal maintainers, dispatchers. A maintenance away is a road worker. A mechanical is defined by 219.5 as a mechanical employee, anybody who performs those mechanical duties. And again, that covered service is hours of service. But in this regulation, we're going to drop it down another level and talk about certified employees. Today, specifically, we're going to talk through the certifications of locomotive engineers. And even though that term isn't in 219, we're going to keep that certified employee definition in our head. As for drug and alcohol use, 219 and the regulations talk through the prohibitions of drug and alcohol use. 219-101, and again, this is except anything in 219-103 like prescriptions and over-the-counter medications. The prohibitions are no employee can use or possess alcohol or controlled substance when the employee is on duty and subject to performing regulated service for the railroad. No employee may report for regulated service or go on duty or remain on duty while in regulated service while under the influence or impaired by alcohol, having a 0.04 or more of alcohol concentration in the breath or blood, or under the influence or impaired by any controlled substance. And when we talk about controlled substances and drugs, I want you to keep in mind under the influence or impaired. It's not the use of. So it's really if you're doing the drug while you're on work time or subject to service, that's going to be more influence or impairment. Under 219-101, number 3, we also talk about no regulated employee may use or possess alcohol for whichever is lesser of the following periods: within 4 hours of reporting to regulated service or after receiving notice to report for regulated service. Some examples of a 219-101 violation are if you observe an employee that is possessing or using drugs or alcohol while on duty in regulated service. Okay, that's a 101 violation. And if you have that possession, there's no test needed. Right there, that's enough for a 101 violation. You don't need to test them if you see them drinking a can of Coors Light at the locomotive stand. Also, this would be an alcohol violation of 0.04 or greater. With an alcohol violation of 0.04 or greater, you can prove that somebody is impaired. You can prove that someone is under the influence, and that is a 101 violation. Now we're going to go into 102 violations. The biggest part here is you think of that word impaired or influence of. When you look at 102, it's no regulated employee may use a controlled substance at any time, whether on or off duty. Examples of that is really a positive drug test. The presence of the drug in the analysis of the urine is all that's needed. Again, if you are under the influence at work or you possess when your alcohol is above a 0.04, that's a 101 violation. A drug violation is a 102. And also I want to note that a refusal to test is also a 101. Or actually it's on its own, but that would fall into the same category somewhat of a 101, but it's actually covered under a different part of the regulation. 219-104 responsive actions. When these events occur, as that DER, you need to remove them from service. The employee does have a right to a hearing, and that hearing is to dispute the validity of the test. And then the regulations say we must comply with 49 CFR Part 40 Subpart O. That's the return to duty process, the SAP evaluation, the SAP assessment, follow-up testing. Those are the 3 things as a responsive action that the regulations tell the drug and alcohol testing procedures and regulations that they must comply by. Now, Mitch, it's a little bit different with certifications. Can you walk through what we do with certification?
Certainly. So under 240, which is engineer certification, 242 is conductor certification. They're very similar. The first thing you have to do is give them the notice that they've been removed from service and why. Basically, you're just suspending that certificate while the process begins. And that's terminology. The terminology that we're all so accustomed to hearing is decertify. We're going to decertify. Really, that's what you're doing. But the language in the regulations is all about suspending, which is what you do first, and then revocating. We won't talk about decertification. Anyway, you suspend, and then they have, like in under 219, there's also a right to a hearing under 240 and 242. Prior to that certificate being suspended, you provide notice, and the initial notice can be verbally. That's fine, but something has to be documented and handed to the employee and put in the file at some point after that, explaining the reason for the suspension, and then the pending revocation, and an opportunity for a hearing before a presiding officer. I want to comment also that if you are under a collective bargaining agreement and you have to provide opportunity for a hearing under that agreement, those can be merged together. It can all be done at the same time if it gets to that point. And of course, always keep in mind that while you're following the guidelines of 240 and 242, you got to follow the guidelines of 219. They go hand in hand when we're talking about drug and alcohol violations and certification. I have a letter that we use in our company for both suspensions and revocations. And I was thinking about this morning, and I wondered, I couldn't remember I knew why I developed this, but I couldn't remember where I got the template. And I do remember now, and I don't know if Brooke is on this call, but I want to thank you. This came basically from the UP, and they were nice enough to share it, and it has worked out really well for many years in our company. It outlines everything, and it gives you check boxes to show exactly what the suspension and pending revocation is for. In other words, what they violated, the cardinal sins. And of course, drug and alcohol comes down to E6 down there at the bottom. This would be the suspension letter. And then once everything gets rolling and you're going to go to revocation, we have the revocation letter as well. And it has the check boxes where the employee can check if they desire a hearing or if they do not. And of course, what you're hoping for is that do not. And then you're on your way to just getting this taken care of and getting the process going. So this, again, thank you for that. And this is coming real handy. And if anyone would like to use this for their company, just let Holly know, and we'll be happy to share it.
Yeah, we can share it with the presentation and send it out, definitely.
Okay. Comes in handy. Under 240, for the locomotive engineers, future eligibility to get their certificate back following an alcohol or drug violation, basically they have to be evaluated by a substance abuse professional to determine if they currently have a substance abuse disorder. And if they do, then the SAP is going to recommend and draw out a plan for treatment and or training. And that has to be followed and completed by the employee. And then once that has happened, they'll sign off on it, and the return to duty testing under subpart H kicks in, to where the return to duty testing starts, and then follow-up testing begins after that. And a comment about follow-up testing is that in order for them to come back into service, they have to complete all of the SAP recommendations and have a clean return to duty test. The follow-up testing, they can now come back, but the follow-up testing occurs while they are working. That goes on after the return to duty has been successfully done. Let's see. Yeah. This has to be completed. This whole process has to be completed within 60 months, that's a pretty long window. I've fortunately not dealt with a whole lot of cases in our company, but when we do, I've never seen one go quite this far. It usually gets done within that. Have you seen any really significant cases to where it got drawn out or should have been drawn out more than that, Holly? 60 months is a long time.
No, the only time it really would happen if the person went on a leave of absence, but the follow-up period shouldn't go over that 60 months. If you're getting an evaluation back and it says test him for 5 years, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but those are the things you watch out for.
So under the regulation, the follow-up testing at a minimum has to be 6 alcohol and 6 drug tests during the first 12 months following return to service. That has to be done. If the SAP may go with that and say that's sufficient, or they may add more to it, but you have to follow what the SAP recommends. Then return to service, follow-up alcohol drug tests. That all is, again, consistent with the return to duty process. This does not, none of this creates an entitlement to utilize the services of a railroad SAP to be afforded leave from employment for counseling or treatment or to employment as a locomotive engineer, nor does it restrict any discretion available to the railroad to take disciplinary action based on conduct described within all of this. Many railroads, especially short line railroads, are zero tolerance, and they may not even go this far. They'll just go straight to discipline and dismiss the employee. In that case, and we may have this another slide, but in that case, we always have to give the employee a list of SAPs that are available to them to seek treatment.
Mitch, if let's just say that we're going to terminate the employee, can we just terminate, or do we need to go in and do something with their certification? Do we need to actually take that step, even if we're going to terminate them?
That certification's in their pocket, but that record of everything is in their file. And then there's a look back process within 219. It's the 4025 form, and there's a look back process within the certification regulations. And it's basically a service record request that, so if that employee goes to another railroad and tries to go to work, they're going to have, the railroad they're applying to is going to have to send that back to the previous railroad, and that's where they're going to get caught. And that's where the record will be kept.
Right.
If everything goes right.
Right.
Be true.
I had a question come in, and it says, what if there's no union representation at the railroad? How do you proceed? I know a lot of, I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of our smaller railroads may not have a union, where maybe like a larger class 1 or even a short line might have a union. How do you have a hearing without a union representative?
The employee has the right to bring in anyone they want to defend them. They could bring in an attorney if they wanted to. Basically, it's between the railroad and the employee.
You would send that information out to the employee and then proceed in front of that presiding officer.
Yeah, and it's all clearly written in the regulation. It's not like the railroad's making it up. So there it is. This is what's going to happen.
And I get that on the 219 side a lot. If a non-union environment wants a 219 hearing, how do you handle it? You could do a go-to meeting, or you still have to do something with that employee.
Real quick, what if the employee doesn't show up for the hearing?
How do you handle that?
You have the hearing without them.
That's right.
And you document it.
You proceed.
It's real fast.
Yeah. That's right. Still put in your information, but great. Again, when all of these certification issues, their eligibility to hold certification depends upon if they complete that follow-up program, right?
Absolutely.
And the return to duty process.
Yeah.
And I think when we look at from the DER view, when you're getting those SAP assessments back from someone who's gone in, conductor or engineer, remember that follow-up program has to have a minimum of 6 alcohol and 6 drug tests in the first year. There's an and there. In my past experience, I've had SAP send me back conductor follow-up plans that might just have alcohol testing. You need to take that back and go back to your SAP and say, I'm sorry, your follow-up plan is for a conductor and the regulations require FRA or require drug and alcohol tests. Again, that's in the first month. Now, what they do after that point is can be different. You can just test for one drug after that point. The regulations don't talk through that. But don't be afraid in this situation to have that conversation with your SAP. Now, you can't go in and say, I disagree with this follow-up plan. You need to have 15 alcohol and drug tests, but you can go back and say there's an error. Check your SAP plan. Mitch, I know that we talked about the naughty word decertification, and we went in here and highlighted ineligible a lot. What happens if you have a violation under 219-101 or 102?
If it's one violation of a 101, you're ineligible to hold a certificate for a period of 9 months. And always remember that a refusal is an automatic 9 months. The way to consider a refusal is it's basically a positive, only worse. Refusals is the worst it can be, but so one violation of a one-on-one and it's 9 months. If you have two or more violations of a one-on-one, kicks it up to 5 years. And the question for you, Holly, is that over any period of time? You have one this year and you get another one 3 years from now. Does that count for two?
That would be a second violation, right?
Okay, that's the way I view it, yes.
Second violation. Yeah.
And a qualifying co-worker report, the employee waives investigation. Certificate shall be suspended during the evaluation and any required primary treatment. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I think this is a lot of railroads have a waiver. They may say, okay, you're going to waive your right to an investigation. We're not going to terminate you. Your certificate's going to be suspended for 9 months. You can still go to the SAP, do everything. But just because they sign a waiver for that doesn't waive their right to that not being suspended. You cannot reduce that suspension for a 101 and 102 violation. If it's a coworker report, so let's say Mitch and I are on a train and I'll just say, Mitch goes, oh my gosh, Holly, oh, I think you smell like a brewery and you think that I'm impaired. And then you go through that coworker report process. I wouldn't be suspended necessarily if I went through that whole entire process because the certification implementation goes away because you're invoking that coworker report.
We move on to the 102, which is basically substance abuse violation. Single violation, you're ineligible to hold the certificate during the evaluation and any required primary treatment. Two violations kicks it up to 2 years. More than two violations kicks it up to 5 years. One violation of a 102 and one violation of a 101 makes you ineligible to hold a certificate for 3 years. Here's a good question. What happens if someone has a random drug and alcohol? The alcohol comes back at 0.04, which is positive, and the drug reports back as positive for THC. How long is the period of ineligibility?
So the question, you have both. Do you look at it like a single violation of 102 and a single violation of 101? Or what do you do? We have asked the question and we do have an answer.
I
we want to
was
make sure. Yeah, because the regulations, of course, if you can believe it or not, aren't crystal clear. But when we talked through to the regulators, we were told that we look at it as a single event. You would actually take the higher of the two ineligibility of their certification and use that. Then if we look at if somebody goes out, has that drug test and alcohol test, they're positive on both, the 101 has a higher implication, right? That's going to be a 9 month. You take them out for 9 months. You don't take them out for 3 years like the one violation of 102 and 101. It's for 9 months.
Yeah, it doesn't compound like I thought it should.
Yeah, the regulations make it seem like that's how it should be, but that's not how they're looking at it. And I think I've been getting a couple questions, people have been texting me actually, and I'm getting them through our chat feature. But if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in the question portal here on the webinar. We'll be addressing them as they come in and as they come up. But I got one here. Let's see. What if you have a pre-employment positive and the candidate completes the SAP process? They come back and are hired. In 9 months, they fail a random. Both tests are federal. Is that a 2 or 5 year D-cert? We know it's not a D-cert, it's ineligibility. We've got a pre-employment. This is a trick question. But we actually had a situation where not meaning me, but up here had a situation where someone took a pre-employment test as a conductor, had a positive test. They go through the SAT process, come back to work, and then have a positive test. Is that one violation or two? And the FRA told us to. Mitch and I might think a little differently, but I won't say that out loud. Those, I think when you have events like this happen, the best thing to do is really reach out to the FRA to ask them those questions, and make sure when you're talking about certification, you're talking to the certification team, you're talking to Kevin Lewis and his team in that regards. If you're talking about drug and alcohol under 219, you can talk with Jerry Powers, Sam, that team. But make sure you're asking those questions when those one-offs happen. And
What's surprising to me about that is that pre-employment, that they weren't your employee yet.
no, right, and they weren't certified.
But but you know what? A drug test is a post-offer, so maybe technically they are your employee. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's a Sam question for sure.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, if you don't know, Mitch and I aren't afraid to ask hard questions. So,
Never be afraid, especially with things like this.
yeah, because you're just trying to really do the right thing.
Absolutely.
We'll talk through driving records, and I know a lot of people have questions in regards to driving records. The regulations in 240 and 242 state that certified employees must do this within 48 hours. If they've got a conviction or completed state action to cancel, revoke, or suspend a license for operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol or a controlled substance, or if they have a completed or state action or a conviction for when they refuse to undergo the testing. That would also be something that would need to be reported within 48 hours of the completed state action. I think this question comes up a lot. When is that completed state action? When is that conviction? What we've gotten from the certification team is that it's when that conviction comes in. So it's not necessarily, you could be in Missouri, you could have a DUI, you actually have a license after that DUI, but in 30 days it goes away. That's not a completed state action today in the regulator's eyes. It's when they go to the court and have that entire conviction. Once that conviction occurs, you have 48 hours to notify the carrier, and I would make sure in your policies you want to state who you report it to. Don't just say you report it to the company. In my experience, I had people report these type of convictions and they haven't gone to the right ears. And really I'm sorry, Mitch. Yeah.
I was saying that's a good point, because it can just go all over the place and not to the person that it really needs to go to.
Yeah, they might just tell the train master and the train master goes, okay, thanks. And really the intention of this part of the regulation is to verify if that person has an active substance abuse disorder. Under the regulations, when you're notified of that conviction, have that person go talk to a DAC, which is a drug and alcohol counselor, which if you look in the regulation, it has a definition of the DAC is a SAP. The biggest thing I would tell you as a SAP, that the SAP process is for violation, okay? DAC process is for non-violations, like a DUI, because that's not a 101 or 102 violation. A DUI is a DUI. It's a state conviction. Also, if somebody goes in and volunteers, has a self-referral, that would be a DAC. You really have them go in there, get that assessment, have the DAC tell you that, and then you would follow up any aftercare treatment plans that DAC would provide for you. Could be follow-up testing. But it's important to understand and remember that's non-DOT testing. It's not a violation. So you don't do DOT testing. It's all non-DOT. And truthfully, sometimes there might not be any testing.
Hey, Holly.
Yes.
Where a DAC is required, could you use a SAP?
You can. The thing is that when that SAP does the assessment, they have to take off their SAP hat and put on their DAC hat. Really what that means is the documentation and the forms are different for a SAP and a DAC, because Part 40 outlines what that SAP should have in their regulations. Like you have to have that assessment. You have to say that the assessment was completed. That's not required for this. The DAC could talk to them themselves and not require anything else. They might say, okay, you don't have an active substance abuse disorder. You don't need treatment. That it could go that far. You could end up, instead of having a 3-page SAP report, you end up with maybe a quarter of a page DAC report. So good question. I think it's also important. 240 and 242 talk about this, and Mitch and I've talked through this a few times. That look back for the MVR, Mitch, it's 36 months, right? You're going back 36 months. What do I do if 5 years ago they had a DUI? That some states might actually have that, or 10 years, or even longer. What do you do with that DUI?
You can't withhold certification. It's only 36 months. But now, as Mr. Noe would like to say, you have knowledge. And so it would be in the best interest of the company to do an evaluation and see if there's a problem. But as far as certification goes, it's a hard line, 36 months.
You want to be very careful if you're going to go after somebody. Go after probably isn't the correct terminology, but you want to make sure that you've got due diligence, and there's nothing in the regulation anywhere that says you should require a DAC assessment if it's over 36 months. We do have that responsive action under 219, 104, and 105. So you got to use your due diligence. Just make good faith and be smart about what you're doing. There's also the fitness requirement in regards to active substance abuse disorders. And Mitch, with this fitness assessment or requirement, if someone has an active substance abuse disorder, what do you do? Or what happens to their certification?
It's withheld.
It's withheld.
You don't want them operating or acting in the roles of conductor if you have that knowledge.
Yep. When a person has that active substance abuse disorder, they shouldn't be certified, but they are denied certification or recertification. If you've find out and Johnny tells you that, hey, I have to go to treatment, they probably could have an active substance abuse disorder in that regard. I don't know, maybe we should go to some of our questions before we get too far into the scenarios.
Okay.
Let's see here. Georgia, do you want to can you read some of the questions to us?
For sure. It looks like Mitch might have answered one already about that DAC question. The one that we just had come in was, can a pre-employment test count as a return to duty test?
The answer is no. You can't have more than one test. So you've got a return to duty test, and I'm not sure of the exact the scenario in here, but you want to make sure that they're separate. You need to have a negative pre-employment test and a negative return to duty test. I'm guessing the question's a little more complicated than that. Maybe you could email me after the call. I have some ideas on probably maybe what we were talking about more in that.
All right, we have another one that asks, which FRA regulation requires 6 drug and 6 alcohol follow-up tests in the first 12 months?
That one is what, 219. I'm going to go really fast back through the scenarios here. It is, so for engineers, 240.119, letter F. And for conductors, 242.115, letter F. You just read down in here and it goes into number 2. Would you say that's correct, Mitch?
That's correct. They almost got matched up. FRA tried to match these up because the regulations were written many years apart and they didn't quite pull it off. They got close.
Yeah. But you're not going to find that in 219. You will not find that in 219.
Certification.
It's important as a DER, you're talking to your certification team about what is happening, about what things are going on. What other questions do we have?
All right, we have another one that asks, what's the best way to handle a pre-employment refusal when the prospective employee claims that they're going to seek a different job because they have a better offer when they were required to recollect?
Okay, so there could be, I could read this in different ways. First of all, let's just say on a pre-employment test, Mitch, I'm going to pick on you. Let's say that I say, hey, Mitch, I want to offer you a job contingent upon you passing this medical and drug test. I want you to go to the clinic and take this drug test. Mitch gets halfway to the clinic and then Spark TS calls and offers him a job. Okay. And then he says, I'm not going. He wasn't handed the cup, right? He didn't truly start that drug test. That doesn't count. That's not a refusal. let's just say Mitch got to the facility and the collection began. They said, hey, Mitch, you're here for an FRA pre-employment, select a cup, and then Mitch selects a cup, and then his phone rings. Okay, the collection started at that point. If Mitch leaves or if Mitch has a cold sample and they do a second collection, those are refusals. Okay, under 219, any test, including a pre-employment test, is not, you cannot perform regulated service for 9 months. Okay, you want to make sure that you're having those conversations. But so okay, here's another scenario. There's so many scenarios that could happen. Let's say you have a pre-employment and that pre-employment comes back negative, but they're negative dilute and they're requiring an immediate collection under directive observation because something with creatinine or something like that. Then I call Mitch, hey Mitch, it's Holly, I'm instructing you need to go in and take another collection under direct observation. And he says no. Actually, now at that point, when I have talked to ODAPC in the past, if he doesn't do that, then that's a failure. At that point, the collection process has started. We've instructed him to go back. That probably should be a refusal at that point, because he did not he did not follow the instructions, and Part 40 does state that. If they don't go back in for that collection, it's a refusal. Again, if these things are happening and you're not 100% sure, and you make sure, number one, you get all the facts and talk to a regulator.
All right.
Are those all the questions so far?
So far, yes.
Okay. And if I'm not answering, or Mitch isn't answering the question to the best of your knowledge, or let us know, we'll go through the specific scenario. We have some scenarios. Let's go through these situations that can happen to a certified employee. Remember, it's not signal maintainers, it's our certified employees, conductors, engineers. All right. So Mitch, I've got a manager trained in signs and symptoms of drug and alcohol impairment and use. I'm that manager, and I notify or verify that someone does have alcohol, signs and symptoms of alcohol. They're an engineer and they refuse to test. What happens next?
Refusal, 101.
What happens?
Guidelines there. 9 months. The whole process of providing notice of a hearing, right to a hearing, is hopefully waived to make our lives easier, or it's conducted, one of the two, and then you revoke for the 9-month period. So, and back to your scenario on the pre-employment where I went in for the test, but I was going for the test, but I got called. If I showed up, I would hope that the manager of the railroad would explain to me, look, dude, whatever you don't refuse this test, because it's going to really mess you up for the next 9 months.
Yeah.
We've actually had that happen.
Mm-hmm. That scenario isn't limited to just conductors and engineers. If you have a mechanical employee that refuses, right. 219 says it's a 9 months. It cannot work regulated service.
Yeah. In this case, it would be a 101. Have to follow those guidelines. Refusal.
How about, I guess we just put this in here as some information that a certified employee can go through the SAT process during their 9-month suspension. However, they can't return to service until the Part 40 subpart O is complete with a negative return to duty test. But if they've got a 9-month suspension, they have to complete their 9-month suspension. Just because they're done doesn't mean they can come back early.
That's a timing thing. Make that work to your benefit as a company.
Mm-hmm. When I'd have a positive conductor engineer, I would just flag my calendar. Okay, this guy's or gal is coming back potentially around here. Just follow and track that.
Right.
So what if I have a DSLE observe a conductor do a line of cocaine while in the break room of the yard office? Is this a 101 or 102?
Anybody?
And to clarify, they're subject to working or on duty. Do you say, oh my gosh, I'm going to test you?
No, it's 101 at this point.
The 101,
you don't have a positive test yet.
You do not have to do a test because you observe it. They could
Oh,
be
that's
impaired
correct.
or under the influence.
Right.
All right, so let's say we have an engineer picked for a random drug test. The drug test comes back positive. Is this a 101 or a 102 violation?
Now you're a 102.
102.
Violation.
That's right.
Positive.
Mhm. Great. And what happens to their certification?
You suspend and revoke. More than likely, you will revoke because you had the positive test. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have the test result right there. But they still have the right to the hearing under 219 to dispute the validity of the test, and then they have the right to a hearing under certification if they're an engineer or conductor. For whatever reason, they think something went wrong here. It's the railroad's fault and not theirs. So, same process.
Mm-hmm. And are they ineligible and suspended for 9 months? Or is it could it be a shorter period of time?
It could be shorter under 102. The 9 months only falls under 101.
That's right.
How am I doing?
You're doing great. You're doing great. You're doing great. Now we have a conductor selected for a random test. The conductor refuses the drug test. What happens to his license? What happens to that certification?
I'm going to suspend it. Here it is. I've got it. And then you're going to revoke it.
That's right. Got to follow the process. You got to follow the process.
101.
Okay, now let's say I'm observed as an engineer, observed smoking marijuana while operating a locomotive. Is that a 101 or a 102? I'm smoking it in the locomotive.
No test is involved. You just got caught doing it. So 101.
That's right. No test, and it's a violation of 101.
And you're basically going straight to an operating rule. If you're under G course 1.5, rule G, whatever you want to call it, you got them for possession and doing it. So.
In the previous scenarios, can the engineer or conductor work in another job on the railroad?
Yeah, it's a good one.
And honestly, this is funny, the regulation itself hasn't changed, but the answer has somewhat changed a little bit. And we'll talk through that in a second. But can I work in a different job?
I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah. You can work in a clerical or non-regulated role. But so non-regulated is a key word. So prior to 2017, you could actually work maintenance way duties.
True.
And you could work mechanical duties. It was common that if somebody had and actually before we had 242, couldn't you work as a conductor?
We didn't even have a certified conductor, but yes, they could have.
You could have had an engineer who had a violation. This is not now, but previously, as the regulations have changed, those things have gone away. Really, you're looking at non-safety sensitive roles that person could work. Now, can they go through the SAT process while working in that job, Mitch?
I would think so.
Yep. They can, but you cannot start that follow-up testing unless they're working in a DOT job. So you have to wait till that suspension is, I don't know, lifted, unsuspended, their license is certified, and then you can begin that process. There we go. How about other questions that we've had? Do we have any more come in? Georgia, do we have any more questions come in?
Sorry, unmute would be helpful. Not yet, no.
Okay. And I think we had a question about the medical card. Can you read that question?
Yes. 1 second, I'm pulling it up.
I think it was, if you have not, so if you've had, so now we're going to just take a peek at FMCSA. Let's say that you have an employee under FMCSA and they have a medical card and you have knowledge that they could have an active substance abuse disorder. I mean, it's not on their medical card. You can require them to go back and get another medical card. And I think the question came up that was like, I think if they were distracted driving and had an accident, and then if somebody had a second, could you require them to go back in to get a medical card? I didn't have enough information to answer that question completely, but we have obligations under FMCSA to, if we think a medical condition is impacting their ability to drive, then you can require them to go back in and get another medical exam. Keep that in mind. I think those are things, if I had more information on the question, more specifics, there's always those little if, ands, or buts in there. We could talk through that a little bit better. And did any other come in? Somebody's got to stump Mitch. I had people telling me they were going to stump him. I don't know. I can't tell you. Can't give away all my secrets, Mitch.
No new questions at the moment.
All right. I do want to thank everybody for coming today. Mitch, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well. I don't know how much expertise I have. I've been doing this for a while.
You've been doing it for a long time. You've been doing it for a long time. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us here at Spark TS or send us an email at info@sparkts.com. And I hope everyone has a safe day. Thank you. Have a good night or good day.
Thank you.